Okay, so I was watching this video. It was talking about this White Lives Matter thing, Kanye West. What I'm going to talk about is the statistics that they were talking about with abortions of black people. That's what they were saying. Here's the reality of statistics. Unless a statistic says this percent of out of this number of in this location, unless the statistic is set up with that information, it is not a real statistic. And I'm going to go into why this is a completely falsified statistic. And it's very simple. What year did they get this data from? Was it only this year? Right? Like, did they get this last month? Or did they go back last year, this month, the year before, and then collect all the abortion data and then come up with a percentage? They're not doing things like looking into, okay, so how many of these abortions are from people who already have kids? So they're aborting kids because they can't afford to have a bigger family. How many of these abortions are from people in school and they're not trying to fail or have to drop out of school? Because what happens when women get pregnant is like you kind of can't go to school properly for at least 5 months out of the 9 months that you're pregnant. So it's like there's all these different data that would counteract the narrative that Candace Owens and whoever she's working with is trying to push. Because only women can have abortions. So it's like you would then be forcing the focus onto black women. Because that's the reality. Anytime there's a statistic about abortions, you literally have to look to women and ask them why. So when they're saying black people abortions is really black women abortions. And then one other thing I didn't talk about is how many of these abortions were like forced abortions. I mean, because sometimes people will be in a relationship and another person will guilt them into having abortions. But here's the real point, the real like meat, the core reason why these statistics are fake. I'm about to say it. Just because someone is getting an abortion now does not mean they won't have their kids later. So you guys realize that? You could get an abortion this year and have a kid this year. You guys realize that, right? So this abortion statistic is widely inflated. Because here's the thing, how many of these abortions are from people who had like 3 abortions this year? Right? Like, how many of these abortions are from people who had a miscarriage and they're just counting it as an abortion? Like, this whole statistic of like, oh, there's 50%, it's like it can't be something to take serious. It has to be something to investigate. And they're not doing the job of investigating it. Isn't Kanye a billionaire? If he really wanted to look into this, couldn't he just drop like $1 million and do a bunch of research real quick? And then come out with something better than 50% of like people? Like it's just stupid. Like this is clearly Kanye being used to a degree by Candace Owens and whoever else to just push some narratives that they want to try and make some money off of or get attention from. There's nothing beneficial that you could really say as a black person that would change anything about this. What can you do? Oh, 1 million women had abortions last year. So what can you do about that? Right? Like, you can't go travel to wherever they are and teach them better. Odds are, if you actually could do that, they would listen to you. But I'm gonna throw out a little analogy here, right? Just to give a hardcore example. It's like these are a couple people, 2 people to be exact, who are black people who do YouTube. If you were to bring this information to them about these abortions, like what could they say to you? I'm pretty sure this person doesn't even have kids. I'm sure both of these people don't even have kids. So like what could they like what influence could they have on this whole abortion thing? Right? Because people say, oh, white people aren't talking about abortion. It's like what? What influence could these 2 people have? And this isn't a picture of the guy, but the guy who does this kind of looks like this. This is a picture that he made. This character is him. Right? It's like already you can only get half of an opinion if you're just gonna generalize and talk about black people anyways, because she's the only one in this situation who can even have an abortion. And if y'all are so against talking to women that y'all can't even talk to women about women getting abortions, on top of the fact that those women probably don't know each other, so they wouldn't be able to come up with a conclusion. Like this is such a scam topic when you're talking about abortions. Right? Like it's just to get people to draw attention to it. It's not a real thing. Because again, if you had an abortion this year, that doesn't mean that you won't have your kid next year. That doesn't mean in 5 years you won't have your kid. Like it's so stupid. But there was one thing that he talked about. One thing that Lo talked about that I wanted to say something about, but I gotta watch it again to remember.
Martin Lawrence. But the point I'm trying to make is he's telling an interesting point about like what is it? This is a completely different. So again, I think he is wrong from the White Lives Matter, but on the completely different conversation he's interested in having, it is interesting what people decide what black is. It is interesting that if I go to certain areas,
when does Black Lives actually matter?
If I go to certain areas of Atlanta,
that's something that is very clear. Like Black lives don't matter. Right? Like there wouldn't have been the slavery history. There wouldn't be all this need. Like George Floyd wouldn't have died being suffocated to death while calling for his mom. Like there's so much stuff that wouldn't happen. Like my school that I went to is down the road from where I'm recording this right now. We didn't have school books, right? So we didn't have the textbooks that we needed for class sometimes because they had a lower amount, and they never bought the extra textbooks that they needed. They ended up buying flimsy books. Like, let me show you just a... I could probably bring up a picture. They ended up buying us these flimsy books that look similar to these. They don't have like a sideways. They looked similar to these. They weren't hardback like this. They weren't textbooks. They ended up buying these flimsy books where you could like rip out the pages and stuff. And it didn't have good explanations in there and all these other problems. It's like if Black Lives Matter, stuff like that wouldn't be a story that I could tell you.
They're gonna make it about what the shirt is about, and those are not the same thing.
And I'm gonna say this way: I think as a black man who grew up in this country, who's gained various perspectives on how black people move around in this country, and just things that I've learned about black people as I've continued to go. That conversation, for whatever reason, continues to escape the dialogue that we should be having within our own community. Again, well, I will repeat it for the third time. It's been repeated in this video. Kanye using White Lives Matter to have this conversation, I think, was very distasteful, because the concept of Black Lives Matter, I think, is very much so alive and well. But there are conversations and dialogues within the black community that continues to escape legitimate conversing about. If that's you understand what I'm saying? Like there's topics and talking points that.
Okay, that's what I wanted to talk about. It's like that's what I was touching on when I looked at these two people. Right? It's like with some of these issues within the black community, like if you just talk to black people about it, what will the impact be? What can these people do about it? Like the average black person does not have an audience on social media. The average black person is not rich enough to go out and do anything in their community. The average black person, there's a long list on all of the things that the average black person cannot do. If y'all actually want people to make an impact, you gotta start getting people like Kanye West, Oprah Winfrey, T.I., the baby, or you gotta get people like that to look more into issues. And the way that I was just now breaking it down in the beginning of the video, the correct way to do statistics, because right now most statistics are just a scam idea to draw attention to something. It's like you get to find more black people who could break down information like that. But this is the last thing that I'm going to talk about, right? It's just the fact that if Kanye really wants to talk to someone who understands how to positively impact the black community, I'm probably more likely a person who would be worth talking to than Candace Owens. Like, how long has Candace been doing things, and what has she actually done to benefit people? Like, not very much, other than like podcasting and talking about things. It's like, if you actually want to positively impact black communities, here's one thing that you could do, right? Go to some black schools, right? Similar to the one that I graduated from. And ask if they got all the resources that they need. Figure out a way to make something where you could make music at these different schools, and then like one song from your band or your orchestra or whatever class can be something that Kanye West used, and then the revenue made from it, right? Like let's say 40% or 50% of the revenue made will go back to that school or something. Like there's tons on top of tons on top of tons of realistic, doable since yesterday things that y'all could come up with to actually help Not just the black community, but people in general. And that's one example of how y'all could actually help the black community. But guess what? You aren't competent enough to sit down and think these things through. It's to the point where if I could just sit down and talk about all of it, it would be more productive on that day than having the stuff that y'all have done.